Try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes, or given you clairvoyance enough to find the rebels' hidden fort.
Why did Darth Vader nearly lose the complete respect of the Imperial elite by the time of A New Hope? Greetings, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. Vader was a figure who had been long feared in the ranks of the Galactic Empire. Just the very mention of his name made all in earshot freeze. He had been one who would kill an ally just as soon as he would an enemy should they ever displease him. As the right hand of the Emperor, Vader carried weight behind every single one of his actions, and if Vader was present within a room, the Emperor's presence was felt there too. But there is a distinct change in attitude towards the Emperor's fist during the events of A New Hope. Aboard the Death Star, hardly any of the high-ranking officers showed Vader the same fear and respect that he used to carry. And it got so bad that Admiral Motti crossed a line, one that no one had ever dared to before, and insulted Vader's powers to his face. So how exactly did this happen? What possible change could have occurred that resulted in such a drop in respect for the Dark Lord? Well, join us today as we open a holocron and dive into the minds of the Imperial elite. The sudden change in attitude that the Imperials display during the completion of the Death Star is no coincidence. After 2 decades of delays, mishaps, and manipulation of bureaucracy, the DS-1 orbital battle station was finally completed. It would be the Empire's greatest weapon, the ability to destroy a world at their fingertips whenever they wanted. Never before has any government wielded such a power. Right next to it, the reputation of one murderous official seemed diminutive. The amount of ego that the Imperial elite got from the Death Star was staggering. They became puffed up and arrogant, believing that they were invincible, and inside of that shell of technology, men like Admiral Motti were convinced that they held the ultimate power in the universe, and there was absolutely no one who could stop or intimidate them, even Lord Vader. The Dark Lord himself had actually become concerned about the effect that the Death Star was having on the Imperial mind. He despised being talked to as an equal, or worse, insulted by inferiors. The worst part was that he wasn't even allowed to set them straight. The Emperor himself had put Vader under the jurisdiction of one Grand Moff Tarkin. Tarkin's job was to oversee the Death Star. Vader's job was to protect it, as well as the Emperor's eyes and ears. But this still put him under the thumb of Tarkin, who could order him around as a non-force sensitive. This was unparalleled. Palpatine did this so that Vader wouldn't kill the men he needed to be in charge of the battle station. Vader had already choked out one of its lead architects back in the day, which only caused more delays for the Death Star, delays that made Palpatine furious. Vader couldn't be trusted not to do that again at a critical moment. His fury was too much, but Vader being put on a leash was not lost on the Empire's higher-ups, who had decided to take full advantage of this new situation. Motti took it a step too far and nearly paid dearly for it. However, Vader knew this was only a symptom of the larger problem, that he believed the Imperials were literally losing their minds because of the Death Star. Grand Moff Tarkin especially, as Grand Moff Tarkin had begun snapping at Vader and believing his ruling to be just as good as the Emperor. And in Legends, we would definitively learn that Tarkin did indeed lose his mind and was even experiencing visions. The next issue of why Vader's respect was called into question was the actual time frame in which these changes happened. The Imperial Senate had just been abolished by the Emperor. 20 years of conniving finally paid off as Palpatine slowly sapped all of the power away from the Senate until it was a husk of what it had been in the Republic Classic era. And then, Palpatine destroyed it completely, divvying up control of Imperial sectors to regional governors who answered directly to him. You see, the rebels at this point in time weren't a big enough threat for the Empire to consider it a war. They were technically in a time of peace. And so with that peace, and with the abolishment of the Senate, all eyes were on political power and not physical power, as all of the Imperial elite saw the changes in the galaxy as the Senate was destroyed. Each of the Moffs and the Grand Admirals were vying for a position as a regional governor so that they could have their own planets and sectors to be in charge of, thus moving up the hierarchical ladder. It was all about political power, which would further their careers. Once the Imperial elite reached a certain point, it becomes more and more difficult to move up, and these men were never satisfied with where they were. Being in the Empire was an extremely competitive environment, so much that they were willing to cannibalize each other for power and prestige, something that Sidious actively encouraged. In an era of war, it would be about who could control the largest fleet, the best weaponry, or who had the most victories under their belt. But in a time of peace, it was all about the politics. Why does this matter? Because Vader himself was a living war machine. Up until now, there was no one who could challenge the Emperor's right hand when it came to the battlefield. He held the most prestige and fear among the elite for the longest time because of his efforts during the days of the Empire's consolidation of power. Vader was the Fist. But now that basically no Jedi remain, and the only military adversary is some tiny pockets of insurgency, the impact of Vader's might is diminished in the Imperial elite's eyes. He was necessary, but only for a time. Vader had no interest or business in politics, and he cared nothing for ruling as a governor because he had all the sway he needed as the Emperor's second in command. But that was starting to change now that Tarkin had basically become Vader's equal on command of Palpatine himself. And with this, in the eyes of the officers, if Tarkin could do it, then they could too. And the days of Vader's oppression were soon to be over. But what about Vader's grand power in the Force? Even if he wasn't a military powerhouse, surely the elites would remember his mystical power. Well, not exactly, as shown by Admiral Motti, who mocked them to Vader's face. The power of the Force was not something that was fully understood, or even believed in by the vast majority of the galaxy, including the Imperials. Many of these men actually served during the Clone Wars, but unless they were right alongside the Jedi, like Admiral Yularen was, they often believed that the skills and powers of the Jedi were greatly embellished. Even at the height of the Jedi Order's power, many average citizens believed their abilities to just be stories. This is something that Palpatine perpetuated after the fall of the Jedi. All traces of them were being destroyed. The Empire ensured that by the time of 0 BBY, the Force was more of a superstition than a reality. But even though the Imperial officers should have known about Vader's power, not many of them were around for his battlefield exploits. And in fact, by this time, it had been almost 10 years since Vader had actually been on an open battlefield. Hunting of Jedi like Obi-Wan or the Ghost Crew incident were often classified. And even if they were not, it's doubtful that these officers spent the time reading Vader's mission reports. Only Tarkin and Yularen were thoroughly aware of Vader's real powers. Everyone else believed the stories were exaggerated at best. So much mysticism surrounded Vader that all of the stories told about him were from paranoid Imperials, those who spoke of him like a boogeyman. So separating rumor and reality was difficult when it came to Vader's reputation. All of this, though, resulted in him losing massive amounts of respect when he was no longer perceived as useful or even necessary. But these were all the reasons why Vader was so disrespected during A New Hope. But never you worry, as we saw in The Empire Strikes Back and in canon, following the destruction of the Death Star, Vader quickly gained his prestige back in full force. The war had begun, and the Empire looked to Vader to lead them into battle and to the next age. Even when the second Death Star was constructed, Vader was personally put in charge of it instead of a Moff Council, solidifying his reputation once and for all. So tell us, had you wondered why the Imperials were so audacious towards Vader? And let us know in the comments down below your thoughts on this period of time in the Empire. And as always, my friends, thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel, and may the Force be with you.